whether this is determined on the basis of descriptive information, discriminative information, or affective information. Somehow you have to build a bridge between when this device measures a certain level of viscosity and when it is that that level is at the point where you say the process should change. Now, anybody can set it so that it does it to the finest level of that particular instrument sensitivity, and it may, just operate that way. But you may be throwing away a tremendous amount of money when you do that, because when it's operating that way, it may be throwing out or changing product that people not only couldn't tell a difference, but if they could, wouldn't care about. So just saying you use the sensitivity of the instrument as a limiting technique can be very foolish. On the other hand, it may be that this instrument isn't sensitive enough, that by the time it measures something, literally hundreds of gallons of product have been produced which would be terribly unacceptable to consumers, and therefore you have a product which is going to be rejected, if not by quality assurance and control techniques in the finished product, eventually in the marketplace. So in the process, you have this type of, if you will, sensory analysis operate. Now there's another type that you can call the expert type sensory analysis, which can operate within the process, in that if you have experienced people who look at, smell, taste, paddle with their finger, whatever they might do, in-process product, and they know, this is kind of like the quality judgment, that if it's like this, it's going to turn out good at the end, and if it's like this, it's likely to turn out bad, they can use, if you will, their own senses to make this judgment. And it's kind of a fine line, perhaps, between what you would call sensory analysis and what you would call, one man's opinion or an expert judgment. But unquestionably, sensory judgments are made in line, in process situations, by everybody from the person who is sorting the bad tomatoes or peaches from the good one, to the quality control man that might be looking at the product after it's been comminuted and makes the judgment that, well, if it's this thick, it's ready. If it's this thick, it isn't ready for the next stage. This, I don't know, as I said, whether one would want to qualify as sensory analysis, but it's certainly sensory judgments. Now, after the product is already a finished product, there's much more of an opportunity for the traditional sensory analysis to operate. And so that's the next stage. And here you can have people who are actually trained in an evaluation technique. This is normally, obviously, not a consumer type group at all, but an instrument type group. For example, you can have a difference type test at the end of the line. The product's coming off at certain number of intervals during the day. You determine whether or not you can tell the difference between the product that's coming off now and the product that, let's say, came off in the last batch. Or you could have a descriptive test and you could have people describing the product in some way. It's rare that you'll have an affective test of any kind, because this is a very special group of people. But certainly difference type tests and descriptive tests are used. Now, what is good and what is bad in these tests should be determined by a great deal of earlier work that's gone on to determine what is and is not important in that product. Now, if it's a company kind of standard, it may be based on just what it is they want to be noted for. You can decide on a management basis, we're the quality company and our standards are high, and we'll charge people more for our product and they'll pay for it. Or we're the El Cheapo company, everybody knows that, and if we charge money, they'll think that something's wrong. People just know what we are, and so our standards are lower. So these are company kinds of standards, and there's no right or wrong in them. On the other hand, there are other standards which may be imposed by the Food and Drug Administration, the Department of Agriculture, and these standards are ones that one has to meet in order to be able to call products, let's say, fancy and so on. Some of these standards are sensory in nature, and they use, unfortunately, they don't use what I would consider either good, in many cases, good sensory analysis techniques, and in almost none of the cases are they ones which I believe are related to what I think consumers might think are important. In other words, somebody may make a judge that this has this level of defects floating around in it, and when it's at that level, it is no longer fancy. Now, can I say honestly that that level of defects floating around would in fact turn a consumer off? They wouldn't like it. Maybe it would, maybe it wouldn't. And most of the standards that have been developed in the food industry that are not developed within the company, I don't believe are based on good relationships between product satisfaction and product characteristics. But nevertheless, they do exist, and you can get standards for the appearance of a, let's say, a peach, which they actually give you a standard peach with its colors and its plastic, and you know, look at it and compare it, and you know, you can do a fairly good job of getting some standards here. In some cases, there are none, and it gets much trickier. But in any case, I think the judgment would be very difficult to make that, in fact, that standard that you're using is one which would apply to the consumer. They're making the problem of what I would consider the validity of their kind of judgment. And I think there are a lot of examples of that in terms of many fruits and vegetable products, meat products, dairy products. They're very sophisticated in some cases. They may be reliable in some cases. They may take a lot of training in some cases. But in most cases, I would be very cautious about generalizing them to consumer judgments. My feeling is, I'll end with this, is that what one would like to try to do is to build as many bridges or relationships between the physical, chemical, and sensory characteristics and the product's acceptance, whether it's particular dimensions or overall acceptance, by the kind of consumer that you want to market to, and determine pragmatically which are the characteristics that are the ones that count and which and to what degree, and develop quality control and assurance standards based on this information rather than on the information that might come, let's say, from the USDA or from the guy who's in production, or for that matter, even what's in the mind of the person doing the sensory analysis work. Well, why don't we open it up to some questions or discussion? Got about 4 minutes or so, I guess, before 12:20. There's a student in the rear there.
Student that knows the least about consumer Dr. Chuck, how does one account for the fact that occasionally a company markets a product absolutely atrocious? For example, last year the students in this class evaluated some sandwich that a very renowned company was marketing in this area internationally. And these sandwich breads were given to the students under coded conditions, and they were asked to place them on crackers to evaluate their texture and flavor. And most of the students in the class described them as being totally inedible. And those of us that were aware of the product had to agree with them. And yet these were selling for something like 80 cents for 7 ounces, and they're still on the market today.
Well, I might add that they did not sell very many of them at 80 cents, and that one of the reasons that you got them is because they weren't selling, and that they were looking for reasons why. So you can say that they were maybe belatedly getting some more input on what the products were like. Unquestionably, the reason that it can't happen is because people do not apply all of the kinds of techniques that I've talked about in a standard and efficient way. Product development takes place in some cases, you know, like a handing down the tablets from Mount Sinai. Here they are, you know, this is it. And you just go out and you test market them. In other words, the amount of work that may have gone in developing a concept and getting a target, in evaluating it, may be almost nil. And that's why it can happen. The other reason it can't happen is because the product that they originally made or were working with, they got to, let's say, the pilot plant stage. And it turned out that, in fact, they couldn't make it any for what they could sell it for, the way they had been developing it. But they're so far along now, they decided, well, let's give it a try. Let's take a chance. Maybe it'll be good enough. They didn't do, let's say, maybe product testing on it. So good work may have been done up to that point, but then when they got into the pilot plant, it fell apart. But there, are literally thousands of examples of what might be considered to be bad products that went into the marketplace. You know, sometimes it happens because of something as simple as storage. They never did a decent storage test. Everything was perfect about the product, but it only lasts for 3 weeks, you know, when it goes through the distribution system. And so what happens is that because they didn't do that, they have no signs at all that there is any problem. It gets out into distribution, 3 weeks later, and it still doesn't work. And so what happens is that because they didn't do that, they have no signs at all that there is any problem. It gets out into distribution, 3 weeks later, and it still doesn't work. And so what happens is that because they didn't do that, they have no signs at all that it's, or is any problem. It gets out into distribution and it's deteriorated in flavor. I'm not saying that's the case, but there are literally an infinite number of mistakes that people can make to produce that situation. And so it's not, I guess probably I'd be more surprised, and am more surprised, when a product comes out that people like than when they have put one out that people don't like. Okay? Thank you.